My fiancée left me because I rescued a dog that was about to be put down. That dog led me to a hidden treasure and a life she'll never know. The name's Jake. I'm 25 and living in my grandfather's old house, a weathered nest with a garage that smells like engine oil and forgotten dreams. Gramps always told me that cars are just like people. Give them a second chance, and they'll surprise you every time. Under the crackling sound of Elvis on that ancient record player, I spend my days fixing up classic cars, and honestly, it's my own personal heaven. That garage isn't just some shed, it's my time machine. Faded Chevy posters yellowing at the corners, the intoxicating smell of gasoline mixed with metal, and all my grandfather's tools arranged exactly how he left them when he passed last year. Some people meditate or do yoga. I slide under a 1965 Mustang and listen to the stories each dent and rust patch has to tell. My girlfriend Christy doesn't get it. Never has. She wrinkles her nose at my oil-stained jeans when I come inside after a long day, suggesting I sell what she calls junk and move to the city with her. I always joke that it's not dirt, it's character. She doesn't laugh. She dreams about me in a tie and press shirt, while I dream about the rebuilt engine coming to life after months of careful restoration. Christy wants the kind of guy who climbs corporate ladders. I'm the kind who climbs under chassis. My hands are calloused from wrenches, not smooth from shuffling papers. Gramps used to say that a man's hands tell his life story. Mine tell of metal persistence and a reverence for American engineering that runs deeper than the Ohio River. Family? Man, better not ask. My brother is a golden boy, Mom's favorite since the day he was born. At our last family dinner, he smirked across the table asking if I was ever going to grow up or if I'd remain the kid with the wrench forever. Real supportive, right? When my grandfather left me the house and his service station in his will, they all expected me to share the wealth. The house sits on almost 2 acres just outside of town, prime real estate that developers have been eyeing for years. The service station, though run down, sits on the main street with commercial zoning. My brother already had plans drawn up for condos before the will was even read. I said no. Couldn't bring myself to demolish Gramps' legacy for a quick buck. Now I'm the traitor of the family, no longer welcome at Sunday barbecues or holiday gatherings. Sometimes standing your ground means standing alone. Gramps taught me that too. One Tuesday afternoon, I drove into town in Gramps' old pickup, a '78 Ford that rumbles like classic rock on wheels. Just needed to grab some parts, and maybe a burger from Mel's Diner. Coming back to the truck, I found a German shepherd sitting on the passenger seat, happily munching on my hot dog bun. The dog had a collar with the name Lucky and a series of numbers that looked like a phone number. I laughed, asking if he was my new boss. His tail wagged like he understood every word. I figured I'd return him tomorrow. No sense ruining someone's evening over a lost dog. When I got home, Christy took one look at Lucky and nearly had a meltdown. A dog? In her pristine world? I promised I'd take Lucky to the address the next day. She calmed down, but I could tell she was counting the hours until the dog would be gone. The next morning, I tracked down the house using the number on Lucky's collar. Some guy around 30 answered the door, looking annoyed at the interruption. When I explained about finding his dog, he barely reacted. Turns out Lucky belonged to his grandfather, who had recently passed away. The family had been planning to drop him at the shelter, since no one wanted an old man's mutt. Something about that struck a nerve. Maybe it was seeing Lucky tied up in their backyard, looking so out of place. Maybe it was thinking about how my own grandfather would have felt if someone had dismissed his belongings, his legacy, as worthless. I couldn't help myself and asked if they'd let me take Lucky. The guy shrugged like he couldn't care less, saying I'd be doing him a favor. Then, noticing my interest, he smirked and asked if I wanted his grandfather's old pickup full of junk too. $300 and it would be mine. Said they were just going to call a junk removal service otherwise. I had been saving that cash for a new set of tools, but something in my gut said to take the deal. Lucky seemed to think so, too, jumping right into Gramps' pickup like he knew a secret I didn't. Looking in the truck bed, I saw records, an old metal detector, a gramophone, all the things Christy would call trash, but that spoke to me of history and craftsmanship. The decision was made before I even realized it. I handed over the cash, got the title signed over, and drove away with Lucky riding shotgun like he'd been doing it all his life. He sat tall in the seat, tongue hanging out, looking for all the world like he was exactly where he belonged. When we pulled into the driveway, Christy was waiting with arms crossed. She watched silently as Lucky bounded out of the truck and started exploring the yard. When I started unloading the treasures from the pickup, explaining my impulsive purchase, her face hardened into a mask I'd seen too many times before. She tossed her house key onto the porch swing. 3 years together, and it all came down to, you chose a dog and someone else's garbage over me. Then she was gone, her car kicking up gravel as she sped away. Alone in the sudden quiet, I sat on the porch steps, Lucky pressing against my side like he was trying to offer comfort. I scratched behind his ears, wondering what the hell I'd just done. Traded a relationship for a dog and a truckload of someone else's memories? Was I losing my mind? But as the evening shadows stretched across the yard, I felt something shift inside me. Not regret exactly, but a strange sense of rightness, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Gramps used to tell me, when one door closes, another one opens. The trick is not getting hung up staring at the closed door for too long. That night, Lucky and I sat in the garage while I played one of the old records from the truck. The scratchy sounds of the band I didn't recognize filled the space as I sorted through the rest of my new possessions. Lucky curled up on an old blanket, looking more at home than he had at his previous house. The metal detector sparked my curiosity. Still had batteries that worked. The gramophone was in surprisingly good condition, and beneath everything was a leather satchel filled with maps and old photographs of places I didn't recognize. "Well, partner," I said to Lucky as the record ended, "looks like it's just you and me now." He thumped his tail against the concrete floor, eyes watching me with what seemed like understanding. Maybe I'd lost my mind a little bit today, but sitting there in the quiet garage with my new canine friend, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I had a feeling we were standing on the edge of something bigger than either of us understood. Looking at Lucky's wise eyes, I wondered what secrets he knew, and what adventures might be waiting for us just around the corner. Something told me this was only the beginning. A week after Christy walked out of my life, I found myself in the garage dismantling the old pickup I'd bought on impulse. Frank Sinatra crooned from the record player about flying to the moon, while Lucky sprawled nearby, contentedly chewing on my worn-out work glove. The truck was proving to be more fascinating than I'd anticipated, like a rolling museum packed with remnants of someone else's adventures. "If this isn't a treasure trove, partner, I'll eat my 10mm socket," I said to Lucky, who thumped his tail against the concrete floor without looking up from his makeshift chew toy. Most guys would be drowning their breakup sorrows in beer by now. Me? I was elbow deep in a stranger's belongings, cataloging each discovery like some kind of blue-collar archaeologist. The pickup bed had yielded vinyl records from artists my dad used to play, a metal detector with surprisingly functional batteries, a gramophone with an ornate brass horn that smelled of decades gone by. Each item told a story of someone who valued history and craftsmanship, qualities my own grandfather had tried to instill in me since I was old enough to hold a wrench. The more I explored the truck's contents, the more curious I became about Lucky's former owner. The man must have been quite the collector, someone who saw value in things most people would discard without a second thought. It felt strange sorting through his possessions, but also oddly right, as if these items had been waiting for someone who would appreciate them. That afternoon, I knocked over my coffee mug while reaching for a particularly interesting record. I lunged to save the vinyl, inadvertently spilling the rest of my coffee across the truck's bench seat. Cursing under my breath, I yanked open the glove compartment looking for something to mop up the mess. Instead of napkins, my fingers found something unexpected, a folded piece of paper tucked behind the vehicle registration. Carefully extracting it revealed a yellowed map with circles, coordinates, and numbers meticulously marked in faded ink. The paper had that delicate quality of something that's been preserved for decades, practically holding its breath until someone found it. Something about the numbers seemed familiar. I frowned, trying a place where I'd seen them before. Then it hit me. I scrambled over to where Lucky was resting and gently lifted the metal tag hanging from his collar. Well, I'll be damned. I whispered, comparing the digits. The series of numbers etched into the back of Lucky's tag matched exactly with markings on the map. This couldn't be coincidence. Not by a long shot. The German shepherd looked up at me with those intelligent eyes, as if he'd been patiently waiting for me to make this connection. I grabbed my phone and punched the coordinates into Google Maps. They pointed to a location about 3 hours away, some tiny of a town I'd never heard of before. My quick search indicated there used to be an old-fashioned diner there back in the 50s and 60s. Lucky, are you some kind of canine genius, or am I losing my mind? I asked, chuckling nervously. The dog just tilted his head, his expression almost smug. My grandfather would have called this the universe sending signals. He always said when coincidences pile up like that, it's life trying to tell you something important. Call it impulsive. Call it escapism from a void Christie left behind. Or maybe it was genuine curiosity about this strange connection between an old map and a dog tag. Whatever the reason, by the next morning, I had packed a duffel bag, filled the pickup's tank, and prepared for an impromptu road trip. Let's roll, buddy, I called, patting the passenger seat. Lucky hopped in like he'd been waiting for this invitation his entire life. As we pulled away from my grandfather's house, I felt like I was following breadcrumbs laid down by someone I'd never met, yet whose paths somehow intersected with mine. Gramps always told me sometimes life's best adventures come when you follow your curiosity instead of your fear. The drive was pure Americana. Endless fields of corn stretching to the horizon, sun shining through the windshield, the pickup's engine humming steadily beneath us. Lucky sat with his head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind, looking like the happiest dog in the world. As mile markers flew by, another of my grandfather's sayings came to mind. Treasures aren't always gold, Jake, but they're always worth searching for. Back then, I assumed he meant rare car parts or vintage tools. Today, I wondered if he'd been talking about something more profound. Experiences, connections, the unexpected paths that lead to something meaningful. By late afternoon, we rolled into the tiny town marked on the map. It wasn't much. A main street with a handful of businesses, most looking like they hadn't changed since the Eisenhower administration. Following the coordinates led us to a boarded-up building on the edge of town, its faded sign barely readable. Starlight Diner. The place looked like it had been frozen in time, then left to decay. The once gleaming chrome exterior had dulled with decades of neglect. Windows were covered with weathered plywood, and a heavy chain secured the front doors with a rusty padlock. I sat in the truck staring at the abandoned building, wondering if I'd wasted a day chasing shadows. Lucky, however, was more animated than I'd seen him yet, whining and pawing at the door, clearly eager to investigate. You really think there's something here, don't you? I muttered, giving his ears a scratch. Something told me to check the glove compartment one more time. Among the old maps and papers was a small brass key I hadn't paid much attention to before. It looked antique, the kind with an ornate head and simple shaft that people don't make anymore. The padlock on the diner's chain looked just as old as the key in my hand. No way, I whispered, but decided to try anyway. The key slid in perfectly, and with a satisfying click, the lock popped open. Lucky darted through the door the instant I pulled the chain free, his tail vanishing into the dim interior. I followed more cautiously, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the dusty space. What I discovered inside stopped me in my tracks. It was like stepping into a perfectly preserved time capsule from the 1950s. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their once bright color faded to a dusty burgundy. A long counter ran along one wall, with chrome stools still firmly attached to the floor in front of it. Vintage neon signs hung silently. Coca-Cola, beers I'd never heard of, and one that simply said, "Eat." The air smelled of dust and old vinyl with faint traces of grease that had seeped into the walls over decades of burgers and fries. In the corner stood an imposing jukebox, a beautiful Wurlitzer with chrome details and colored panels that must have been the centerpiece of the diner in its heyday. As I approached, drawn by its silent presence, I couldn't resist running my fingers over the dusty buttons. Out of curiosity, I pressed one, not expecting anything to happen in an abandoned building. To my complete surprise, the jukebox shuddered to life. Lights flickered weakly across its surface, and after a few mechanical clicks and whirs, the opening notes of blue suede shoes filled the space, crackling through ancient speakers. I realized the electricity must still be connected. Perhaps the owner had kept the utilities on all these years, or the service had never been officially terminated. It's like Elvis might walk in and order a burger, I murmured, half expecting some greaser in a leather jacket to materialize in one of the booths. The music played on, the old jukebox running on power that still flowed to this forgotten corner of small-town America. Someone had been keeping this place in a state of suspended animation, paying bills for decades without ever opening the doors. Following Lucky's lead, I made my way behind the counter. Laminated menus still sat in their holders, advertising hamburgers for 25 cents and milkshakes for a dime. Cash registers with mechanical buttons waited patiently for customers who would never arrive. Lucky barked sharply, drawing my attention to a drawer beneath the counter. It was locked, but a bit of careful jiggling popped it open. Inside was a metal lockbox, the kind people used to store important documents before everything went digital. With hands that suddenly felt clumsy, I lifted the box onto the counter. The lid opened without resistance, revealing a single envelope inside, yellow with age but perfectly preserved. My name wasn't on it. Of course not, but something in me knew it had been waiting for whoever found this place. The letter inside was written in shaky handwriting, the kind that comes from elderly fingers still determined to communicate. The paper made soft crackling sounds as I unfolded several carefully written pages. If you're reading this, it began, you're either remarkably persistent or lucky chose you. Either way, it seems the Starlight is where you were meant to end up. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms as I read the signature at the bottom, Harold Jenkins, Lucky's original owner. The dog pressed against my leg, as if sensing we were learning about his past. The letter told an American love story that seemed almost too perfect to be true. The Starlight Diner, Harold explained, was where he'd met his wife Marge in 1952. They'd fallen in love over chocolate malts, married 6 months later, and eventually purchased the diner themselves, running it together for nearly 4 decades. When franchise restaurants and fast food chains moved in during the 1980s, the Starlight couldn't compete. Rather than sell to developers who wanted to tear it down for a strip mall, Harold and Marge had simply locked the doors one day in 1991, preserving everything exactly as it had been during its glory days. "This place holds the best memories of our lives," Harold wrote. I couldn't stand to see it become just another parking lot, so I locked it up and kept paying the bills, waiting for someone who might appreciate it for what it was, a piece of American history that deserves to live on. Then came the part that knocked the wind out of me. Harold was leaving the diner, the entire property, to whoever found this letter. The only conditions: they must have rescued Lucky from Harold's ungrateful relatives, and must promise to restore the diner rather than sell it to developers. "The Starlight is yours now," he wrote. "The deed and all legal paperwork are in a safe deposit box at First National Bank in town. The key is taped to the back of this letter. Lucky will show you where the real treasure is hidden when the time is right." I sank onto one of the dusty stools, the letter trembling in my hands. This couldn't be real. People didn't just bequeath diners to complete strangers through elaborate scavenger hunts. Yet here I was, sitting in a perfectly preserved relic of someone else's American dream, with a German shepherd who seemed to know more about what was happening than I did. Lucky suddenly barked loudly, making me jump. He stood by the door, his posture alert and eager, as if telling me it was time to go, or perhaps that there was more to discover. This is either the greatest treasure hunt ever, or I've just inherited a pile of vintage ruins. I laughed nervously, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into my pocket. Despite my disbelief, something deep inside me resonated with Harold's words. I could feel it in my bones. We were standing on the edge of something significant, something that might change everything. As I followed Lucky back to the truck, the jukebox faded into silence, the last notes of rockabilly hanging in the air like a promise from past. The sun was setting over the small town, painting the abandoned diner in golden light that made it look almost alive again, waiting for its chance to welcome guests once more. In the truck, I examined the safe deposit box key that had been taped to Harold's letter. Tomorrow we'd visit the bank and see if this wild story had any legal standing. For tonight, we'd find a pet-friendly motel and try to get some rest, though my mind was racing too fast for sleep to seem possible. Lucky settled into the passenger seat with a satisfied sigh, looking for all the world like a dog who had successfully completed an important mission. I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets he might be keeping, and what Harold had meant about the real treasure. "You've got more surprises up your sleeve, don't you, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. Lucky just looked at me with those knowing eyes, his tail thumping against the seat in what seemed like confirmation. Whatever adventure we were on, it was only just beginning. The next morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Lucky and I grabbed breakfast at the town's only diner, a modern place with laminated menus and fluorescent lighting that made the Starlight seem even more magical by comparison. With Harold's letter and safe deposit key burning a hole in my pocket, we headed straight for First National Bank. The bank was a solid brick building that looked like it had weathered at least a century of economic ups and downs. Inside, the manager's eyes widened when I showed him the key and mentioned Harold Jenkins' name. He led us to a private room where he unlocked the safe deposit box with reverent care, as if handling something legendary. Mr. Jenkins was a fixture in this town for decades, he explained, pulling out a thick envelope of legal documents. Everyone wondered what would happen to the Starlight. He was pretty secretive about his plans. The paperwork inside was meticulous, a deed to the diner property, transfer documents already filled out with blanks for the new owner's information, and a detail will specifying conditions. The diner must be restored, not demolished, and Lucky's welfare must be guaranteed. A separate note confirmed that all property taxes were paid through the current year. I sat there stunned, holding legal proof that I now owned a piece of American history. The manager recommended a local attorney who would handle Harold's affairs, so our next stop was a small law office just down the street. The lawyer, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Wilson, wasn't surprised to see me. "Harold told me someone would come eventually," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the documents. He was quite confident his plan would work. She explained the legal situation. The property was free and clear, no liens or encumbrances, and the transfer was legitimate. All I needed to do was sign the papers, pay a modest filing fee, and the Starlight Diner would officially be mine. The whole process took less than an hour. "Harold was an unusual man," Margaret remarked as she notarized the final document. "Most people would have just sold that property years ago. But he believed in preserving history, not just erasing it for something new." She looked down at Lucky, who sat patiently by my side, and he loved that dog-like family. As we left the law office, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was now the owner of an abandoned 1950s diner in a town where I didn't live, with no clear idea of what to do next. Yet somehow, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Lucky and I returned to the Starlight that afternoon. As I unlocked the chain and pushed open the doors, sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The place felt different now. It was mine, with all its history and potential. We decided to explore the property more thoroughly. The diner sat on nearly an acre of land, with a small parking lot out front and an overgrown area behind. Lucky seemed especially interested in the backyard space, trotting around with purpose rather than just sniffing randomly. Suddenly, Lucky trotted toward a massive oak tree at the edge of the property. Instead of sniffing around like dogs normally do, he simply sat down and stared up at the tree, his posture alert but patient, as if waiting for something to happen. I followed, puzzled by this unusual behavior. The tree was ancient, its trunk wider than my outstretched arms could encircle, with branches creating a broad canopy overhead. Following Lucky's upward gaze, I spotted something odd, a metal dog bowl wedged in the crook of one of the lower branches. "Lucky, you can't be serious," I laughed. Then understanding dawned on me. Harold must have fed Lucky special treats at this specific spot, training him to remember this location. This wasn't random dog behavior. This was deliberate conditioning, and the next step in Harold's elaborate plan. If there's a dog bowl in a tree, what else might be hiding around here? I wondered aloud. Lucky remained seated, his eyes fixed on the spot beneath the tree, as if he knew exactly what was buried there. I jogged back to the truck and grabbed a small shovel I kept for emergencies. If I dig and only find a bone, I'm officially giving up, I joked to Lucky, who continued sitting at attention, watching patiently as I began to break through the hard-packed earth beneath the oak tree. Part of me felt ridiculous, a grown man digging beneath a tree because his dog led him there, but something stronger pushed me forward. About 2 feet down, the shovel struck something with a metallic clang that sent vibrations up my arms. My heart began hammering in my chest. Using my hands to clear away the remaining dirt, I uncovered the corner of what appeared to be a metal box. With mounting excitement, I dug around its perimeter until I could grip the edges and pull. It took considerable effort, but eventually I hauled an old-fashioned strong box from its earthen vault. It was surprisingly heavy, made of iron with intricate locking mechanisms that had somehow endured years underground. The box was locked, but the key from Harold's letter, the one I'd assumed was just a diner, fit perfectly into this lock as well. With hands that wouldn't stop trembling, I turned the key and lifted the lid. What I saw inside literally took my breath away. The box contained dozens of gold coins, each nestled in a custom velvet-lined compartment. They gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as if they'd been polished yesterday, not buried for who knows how long. These weren't just any coins. Even with my limited knowledge, I could see that these were American gold pieces from the 1800s. Eagles, double eagles, and other denominations I couldn't immediately identify. Each one featured intricate designs. Liberty heads, eagles with outstretched wings, shields, and stars. Some were dated as far back as the 1830s. You really did find a treasure, old man, I whispered, thinking of Harold and his meticulous planning. Lucky barked once, as if in agreement, his tail wagging with satisfaction at a job well done. I carefully returned the coins to their box and brought my discovery back to the motel. That evening, I researched historical gold coins on my laptop, comparing images to what I'd found. It became clear that my box contained some genuinely rare specimens, not just gold by weight, but numismatic treasures that collectors would pay far above metal value to own. The next morning, I called several coin experts I found online. One, based in Denver, agreed to meet me halfway to examine the collection. He warned me not to clean the coins or handle them more than absolutely necessary to preserve their value. 2 days later, I sat across from Robert Hargrove, a professional numismatist with 30 years of experience. I watched his expression change from professional politeness to genuine awe as he examined each coin with a jeweler's loupe. "This is extraordinary," he finally said, putting down a particularly impressive double eagle. "You have pieces here that museums would display behind bulletproof glass. That 1838 Liberty head alone. There are only a handful known to exist. And this 1822 half-eagle? Almost priceless." His professional assessment confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. I was sitting on a fortune. The collection's total value, he estimated, was between $8 and $10 million. One coin alone might fetch $2 million at auction. "Where did these come from?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. I explained about Harold the diner and finding the strong box, leaving out Lucky's role to avoid sounding completely insane. Robert recommended selling a portion through a reputable auction house while keeping some of the rarest specimens as investments. "These coins have appreciated steadily for over a century," he explained. "They'll almost certainly continue to increase in value." Following his advice, I consigned about half the collection to a prestigious auction house, keeping the rest in the bank vault. The auction exceeded even Robert's expectations. My half of the collection sold for just over $5 million after fees. The remainder, now properly insured and securely stored, represented both an investment and a connection to Harold's legacy. With the proceeds secured in several banks and investment accounts, I returned to the Starlight with a decision made. This wasn't just a windfall. It was an opportunity to honor the man who had changed my life through an elaborate act of faith in a stranger. I met with a local notary who confirmed what the lawyer had already told me. The diner was mine free and clear, with the only condition being that I restore rather than demolish it. With the financial means to fulfill that obligation several times over, I knew exactly what I needed to do. First, I needed a place to live. I purchased a modest craftsman-style house just a few blocks from the diner. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable, with a fenced yard for Lucky and a front porch where I could sip coffee while watching the sunrise. The town was small but friendly, with residents who remembered Harold and Marge fondly and seemed cautiously optimistic about a newcomer taking over the beloved local landmark. Next, I hired an architectural firm that specialized in historical restorations. Their excitement about the project was contagious. Apparently, preserved 1950s diners were increasingly rare, with many having been demolished or modernized beyond recognition. "This is a time capsule," the lead architect marveled during our initial walkthrough. "Almost everything is original. We won't restore it, we'll revive it." The plans we developed would preserve every authentic detail while bringing the building up to modern safety codes. The original booths would be reupholstered in the same red vinyl. The chrome fixtures would be polished but not replaced. The jukebox would be professionally restored to working condition, stocked with the same songs that had played when Harold and Marge first met. Meanwhile, I established a relationship with a local bank, set up the necessary business accounts, and began the process of acquiring permits and licenses. My grandfather had always said, "Real wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with it." For perhaps the first time, I truly understood what he meant. I found myself standing outside the Starlight one evening, watching his workers carefully remove the plywood from the windows, revealing the original glass beneath. Lucky sat beside me, his presence a constant reminder of the strange journey that had brought us here. "We're really doing this, aren't you?" I said to him, scratching behind his ears. He leaned against my leg, a solid presence that somehow always seemed to know more than a dog should. This wasn't just a business venture or an investment of my newfound wealth. It was a commitment to preserving something authentic in a world that increasingly valued the disposable. The Starlight wouldn't be a museum piece, frozen in time. It would live again, serving new generations while honoring its past. As I watched the sunset paint the diner's chrome exterior in shades of gold and amber, I realized that this wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the Starlight, but for me. A week ago, I'd been fixing cars in my grandfather's garage, licking my wounds after Christie's departure. Now I stood on the threshold of a completely different life, one I never could have imagined. Some might call it luck, but my grandfather would have called it destiny. "The universe doesn't make mistakes," he used to say. "It just sometimes takes a roundabout path to get you where you need to be." Standing there with Lucky, watching the workers carefully restore the Starlight Diner to its former glory, I couldn't help but feel that this was exactly where I needed to be. The restoration of the Starlight Diner was moving along smoothly. Each day revealed another piece of its former glory. The neon signs now glowed with their original brilliance. The chrome fixtures gleamed under new lighting, and the red vinyl booths had been meticulously reupholstered to match their 1950s splendor. I decided to keep the menu authentic too. Burgers, fries, and milkshakes would be the stars, with recipes sourced from diners of that era. This place wouldn't just be a restaurant. It would be a living museum to a simpler time in American life. I was polishing the newly restored counter one morning when the bell above the door jingled. We weren't open yet. The "coming soon" sign was still prominently displayed in the window, but I had forgotten to lock up after contractors left. A young woman about 26 stood in the doorway, sunlight streaming in behind her. She had an easy smile and carried a cardboard box in her arms. Lucky, who had appointed himself the diner's official greeter, trotted over to investigate. "I'm so sorry to barge in," she said, kneeling to let Lucky sniff her hand. "I'm Allison Henderson. My mom worked here when she was in high school." Something about her name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. In Harold's papers, there had been mentions of a waitress named Betty Henderson who had worked at the Starlight for years. "Betty's your mom?" I asked, setting down my polishing cloth. Allison nodded, her eyes brightening. "Mom passed away last year, but she never stopped talking about this place. She said they made the best chocolate malts in 3 counties. She gestured to the box. When I heard someone was finally restoring the Starlight, I thought these might help. The box contained treasures, original menus from the 1960s, a perfectly preserved waitress uniform, and dozens of photographs showing the diner in its heyday. Harold and Marge appeared in many of them, along with a pretty young waitress who had Allison's smile. "These are incredible," I said, carefully examining each item. "I've been trying to get everything as authentic as possible." "Mom would be thrilled," Allison replied, running her hand along the counter. She said your first milkshake at the Starlight was like a rite of passage in this town. Everyone remembered their first Starlight malt. I found myself telling Allison the whole story, finding Lucky, discovering the diner, and the treasure that made the restoration possible. Something about her made conversation easy, like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. "Would you like to help?" I asked impulsively. I could use someone who has a connection to this place. Someone who understands what it meant to people here. Allison's marketing degree and experience managing social media for local businesses turned out to be exactly what the Starlight needed. She had ideas about building anticipation for our grand reopening, creating an Instagram account documenting the restoration process, reaching out to local newspapers, and planning special events that would honor the diner's history. Within days, she had become indispensable. We worked side by side, placing the original photographs in frames around the diner, positioning the vintage jukebox exactly where it had stood in the old days, and debating the merits of different milkshake recipes. Lucky seemed to approve of our partnership, dividing his attention equally between us as we worked. One afternoon, while I installed the refurbished light fixtures, Allison filmed Lucky sitting in one of the red booths wearing a tiny bow tie she brought for him. She was laughing as she narrated. "And here's Lucky, the four-legged treasure hunter who helped uncover the Starlight secrets." "What are you doing?" I asked, climbing down from my ladder. "Creating content," she replied with a grin. "TikTok loves a good dog story. And Lucky here has star quality written all over him." I wasn't convinced that social media was the right approach for a 1950s diner, but Allison assured me it would bring in a diverse crowd, both older folks nostalgic for the original Starlight and younger people looking for authentic experiences in our increasingly digital world. "Trust me," she said, uploading the video. "Lucky's about to become an influencer." She wasn't wrong. The video of Lucky telling the story of how he led me to treasure and a forgotten piece of Americana caught on immediately. By the next morning, it had over 50,000 views. By the end of the week, that number had climbed to 500,000. The comment section was filled with people sharing their own memories of classic diners, lost landmarks, and beloved pets who had changed their lives. "Lucky, you're more famous than Elvis now," I joked, scratching behind his ears while he lounged in what had become his favorite booth. He yawned in response, apparently unfazed by his newfound celebrity. The unexpected attention brought something wonderful. People from surrounding towns began sending in their own Starlight memories. An elderly couple mailed a napkin they'd saved from their first date there in 1962. A retired mechanic sent photographs of the parking lot filled with classic cars during weekend cruise nights. A former cook shared his secret recipe for the diner's famous apple pie. Each contribution added another layer to the Starlight story, helping us create something more authentic than I could have managed on my own. Allison organized it all into a scrapbook that would be displayed prominently when we opened. Meanwhile, I had another project underway. In the back of the property sat my grandfather's pickup, the one that had started this whole adventure. I decided it deserved a second life, too. Evenings after working on the diner, I'd spend hours restoring the old Ford, replacing rusted panels, rebuilding the engine, and carefully matching its original paint color. When finished, it would stand outside the diner as a monument to second chances. "Your hands are always going to be stained with grease, aren't they?" Allison teased one evening as I scrubbed engine oil from my fingers before joining her to review menu options. "Some things never change," I replied, thinking of Christie's constant complaints about the same issue. The difference was that Allison's observation held affection rather than criticism. As opening day approached, our TikTok following had grown to include people from across the country. Some were planning road trips just to visit the Starlight when it opened. Local news stations had picked up the story, and a reporter from a national travel magazine was scheduled to cover our grand opening. "This is getting out of hand," I told Allison as we prepared for a pre-opening inspection by the health department. I just wanted to honor Harold's wishes and restore a piece of local history. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans, she replied, straightening a picture frame. My mother always said the Starlight was magic. Looks like she was right. The night before our grand opening, we held a private event for the contractors, local officials, and others who had helped bring the Starlight back to life. The jukebox played Carl Perkins' Blue Suede Shoes, while guests sipped milkshakes and marveled at how perfectly the restoration had captured the spirit of the original diner. Looking around at the gleaming chrome, the glowing neon, and the smiling faces, I felt a strange sense of fulfillment I'd never experienced before. My grandfather would have understood. He always said that giving new life to forgotten things was the most satisfying work a person could do. Grand opening day dawned bright and clear, with a line of people stretching down the block before we even unlocked the doors. Some were locals who remembered the original Starlight. Others were visitors who had seen our story online and driven hours to be part of the revival. Among them were several classic car enthusiasts who had brought their vintage vehicles to park outside, creating a scene that could have been straight out of 1955. At exactly 11 a.m., Allison and I, with Lucky between us, cut the ribbon strung across the entrance. Cheers erupted from the crowd as the doors opened and people streamed in, filling the booths and counter seats within minutes. The jukebox played Chuck Berry while waitresses in authentic uniforms delivered burgers and shakes to eager customers. An elderly couple approached me, holding hands and looking around with tear-filled eyes. We had our first date here in 1957, the man said. Never thought we'd get to show our grandkids where it all started. Allison moved seamlessly through the crowd, taking photographs, greeting guests, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Lucky basked in attention, accepting gentle pats from children and posing for countless photos with visitors who recognized him from TikTok. The restored pickup gleamed in the parking lot, drawing admiration from car enthusiasts. "You're Mr. Diner now," Allison whispered as she passed by. "But your jeans still have grease stains." I smiled, realizing she was right on both counts. In just a few months, my life had transformed completely. From a small-town mechanic nursing a broken heart to the owner of what was quickly becoming a landmark attraction. Yet some things remained constant. My love for bringing old things back to life, my preference for working with my hands, and apparently my inability to keep motor oil off my clothes. The lunch rush was in full swing when a familiar face appeared at the counter. I nearly dropped the coffee pot I was holding. Christy stood there, looking exactly as she had the day she walked out of my life. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, not a thing out of place. Only her expression was different, uncertain, almost apologetic. "Jake," she said, her voice barely audible over the diner's happy commotion. "This place is amazing. I saw the videos online. I had no idea." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. 6 months ago, her return would have been everything I wanted. Now, standing in the diner with Allison helping a family at a nearby booth and Lucky dozing contentedly under the counter, Christy seemed like a visitor from another lifetime. "Thanks. I finally managed. It's been quite a journey." "I was wrong about you," she said, leaning forward. "About everything. I thought you were wasting your potential fixing cars in that old garage. But look at what you created here." She gestured around the bustling diner. "I made a mistake, Jake. I'm sorry." In the pause that followed, my grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. Some bridges, once burned, are better left that way, not out of bitterness, but because the detour led you somewhere better. "I appreciate that, Christy," I said sincerely. "But you made your choice, and it turned out to be the right one for both of us. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't left." She looked surprised, clearly having expected a different response. Before she could reply, Lucky emerged from his spot under the counter, regarding Christy with curious eyes. He gave a single definitive bark that seemed to say everything that needed saying. "He remembers you," I said with a slight smile. Christy had never been fond of Lucky, viewing him as just another messy intrusion in her orderly life. "Is he still staying with you?" she asked, not reaching to pet him. "He's not staying with me." I corrected. "We're staying together. Partners." As if understanding the conversation, Lucky returned to his spot, apparently having said his piece. Christy nodded slowly, her expression shifting as she realized the full extent of what she had walked away from and what had grown in her absence. "Well, congratulations on all this," she said, gesturing vaguely around the diner. "You deserve it." With that, she turned and walked out, the bell jingling behind her. I watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away, feeling not regret, but quiet certainty that things had worked out exactly as they should have. Allison appeared at my side, following my gaze. "Old friend," she asked. "Old chapter," I replied. "Definitely closed now." The rest of opening day passed in a blur of activity. Endless orders, countless conversations with delighted customers, and more milkshakes than I could count. By closing time, we had served over 500 people and received requests to book the diner for private events months in advance. As the last customers left and we locked the doors, Allison, Lucky, and I collapsed into a booth, exhausted but exhilarated. The diner was finally quiet, with only the sough of the refrigerators and the occasional ping of cooling metal breaking the silence. "We did it," Allison said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Lucky, sprawled across the booth beside me, thumped his tail in agreement, looking around at what we had accomplished. Not just the physical restoration of the diner, but the revival of something that mattered to this community. I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. The Starlight was humming with new life. Lucky had become a local celebrity, and wherever this journey with Allison was headed, it felt right in a way nothing ever had before. My grandfather would call it finding your purpose. Harold might have called it destiny. Whatever it was. Sitting there in the quiet diner with Lucky beside me and Allison across the table, I knew this was just the beginning. 2 weeks after the Starlight's grand reopening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The local newspaper had run a feature on the diner, complete with the story of Lucky, the buried treasure, and the remarkable restoration. Then a regional news channel picked it up. By the time a popular food and travel blog published a glowing review of our perfectly preserved slice of Americana, my face and Lucky's were plastered across the internet. The viral fame was one thing. The mention of the multi-million-dollar coin collection was another entirely. I'd been discreet about the financial details, but journalists have a way of uncovering the juicy parts of any story. One headline blared, "Small-town mechanic strikes gold, revives historic diner." That's when my family suddenly remembered my existence. My phone lit up with a text from my brother Mike for the first time in over a year. "Bro, just saw you on the news. That diner looks amazing. We should catch up soon." 10 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but her message was dripping with newfound affection. "Jakey, honey, I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. Your father would have been too. We should all get together for dinner soon. Call me back, sweetie." I played the message for Allison as we closed up the diner that night. Her eyebrows shot up in perfect arches of skepticism. "Wow, nothing brings family together like a news story about buried treasure," she remarked, wiping down the last table. "Are you going to call her back?" I hadn't decided yet. The last time I'd seen my family was at the reading of my grandfather's will, when my brother had stormed out after learning that Gramps had left me the house and garage instead of splitting everything equally. My mother had followed him, giving me a look that suggested I'd somehow manipulated an old man into playing favorites. 3 more calls and 5 texts later, I finally agreed to Sunday dinner at my mother's house. Allison offered to come along for moral support, but this was something I needed to handle alone. Well, not entirely alone. Lucky would be my wingman, as always. Pulling into my childhood driveway felt strange, like visiting a museum exhibit of my former life. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the lawn more perfectly manicured under my brother's obsessive care. Lucky gave a reassuring whine from the passenger seat as I killed the engine. "Remember," I told him, "no matter how many treats they offer you, we're a package deal." My mother answered the door with a theatrical gasp, as if my appearance was the most delightful surprise imaginable, rather than the dinner she'd been badgering me about for days. Mike stood behind her, grinning with uncharacteristic warmth. His wife, Denise, lingered in the background, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Oh, you brought the dog," my mother said, her smile faltering slightly. "Lucky goes where I go," I replied, stepping inside. He's family. The dining room table was set with a good china, a clear sign that this was meant to be a special occasion. The conversation started with carefully neutral topics: the weather, local gossip, distant relatives' health issues. No one mentioned money, the diner, or our previous estrangement until we were halfway through the main course. So, Mike finally ventured, setting down his fork. "That's quite a story about finding those gold coins. Must be worth a fortune, huh?" And there it was, the real reason for the family reunion. I took a slow sip of water before answering. It was a lucky break, I admitted, the kind that changes your life. "Well, family should share in each other's good fortune," my mother interjected, reaching over to pat my hand. "After all, we're blood." It was remarkable how they'd suddenly remembered our connection after a year of radio silence. Even more remarkable was their assumption that my newfound wealth should naturally flow in their direction. "Speaking of family," Mike said, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was persuasive, "Denise and I have been looking at investment opportunities. That strip mall development I told you about last year is back on the table. With the right investor, it could be huge. The same development he'd planned to build after tearing down Graham's garage, the one that had sparked our falling out in the first place." "I thought that land wasn't available anymore," I said, knowing full well it wasn't. "Well, everything's negotiable for the right price," he replied with a wink. "And with your resources now, we can make a serious offer." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "It would be wonderful to see you two working together, just like your father always wanted." That was a stretch. Dad had never suggested Mike and I should partner on destroying Graham's legacy to build a strip mall. But historical accuracy wasn't the point of this dinner theater production. Lucky, who had been lying quietly under the table, chose that moment to stand up and rest his head on my knee, fixing me with his intelligent gaze. I scratched behind his ears, drawing strength from his steady presence. "You know," I said, looking around the table, "my grandfather used to say something that stuck with me. Forgiveness is free, but trust has to be earned. I'm happy to forgive the things that were said after Gramps died, but business is business." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What exactly does that mean?" Mike demanded, his friendly facade cracking. "It means I'm glad we're talking again," I explained calmly, "but I won't be investing in your development, and I won't be sharing the money from the coin collection either. Those coins were left to me through an incredible act of faith from a man I never met. I'm honoring his wishes by using that money responsibly." My mother's face crumpled into a familiar expression of disappointment. "After everything we've done for you." "I appreciate everything you did while raising me," I interrupted gently. "And my door is always open if you want to be part of my life again. You're welcome at the diner anytime. But the money and the business decisions are mine." It was the first time in my life I'd stood firm with my family, without wavering. There was no anger in it, no desire for revenge or to hurt them, just a clear boundary that needed to be drawn. Mike pushed his chair back on the table with enough force to rattle the dishes. "Same old Jake," he muttered, selfish to the core. "Actually," I said, rising and signaling Lucky to follow, "I'm not the same old Jake. That's the point." I thanked my mother for dinner, left my contact information for when they were ready for a relationship that wasn't transactional, and drove away feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I'd been the adult in that house. Not the little brother, not the family disappointment, but a man who knew his own mind. Lucky stuck his head out the window on the drive home, tongue lolling in the evening breeze. "You did good," his happy expression seemed to say. Back at the Starlight, Allison was waiting with a fresh pot of coffee and a sympathetic ear. As I recounted the dinner conversation, her expression shifted from amusement to outrage to pride. "You stood your ground," she said when I finished. "Your grandfather would be proud." "It's strange," I admitted, watching Lucky curl up in his favorite booth. A year ago, their disapproval would have crushed me. Now it just feels like their problem, not mine. Life at the Starlight fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next few months. The initial frenzy of media attention gradually subsided, but a steady stream of customers kept the booths filled and the jukebox playing. We expanded the menu, added a classic car night every second Friday, and started hosting swing dance lessons in the parking lot during summer evenings. Allison's marketing genius kept us relevant without sacrificing authenticity. Lucky maintained his status as local celebrity, greeting regulars and posing for photos with visitors. And I found myself doing something I'd never expected, giving interviews about the importance of preserving America's roadside heritage. The highways of this country are lined with forgotten places like the Starlight, I told a reporter from a classic car magazine. Every shuttered diner or abandoned gas station was once somebody's dream, somebody's livelihood. When we restore these places, we're not just saving buildings, we're keeping those dreams alive. My grandfather's auto repair business got a second life too. Using part of the treasure money, I renovated his old garage into a specialty shop for classic car restoration. It seemed fitting. The place where I'd learned to bring old engines back to life was now dedicated to that purpose. Through it all, Allison was my constant partner. Her quick wit kept me grounded when success might have gone to my head. Her creative vision expanded what the Starlight could be. And her hand in mine, as we walked Lucky each evening, made every day better than the last. On the anniversary of the Starlight's reopening, I closed the diner early and set a single table for two, complete with candles and the best milkshake glasses we had. As Allison came through the door, Lucky trotted over to her with a small velvet box attached to his collar. "What's this?" she asked, kneeling to accept the box while giving Lucky his customary ear scratch. "Open and find out," I suggested, suddenly nervous despite weeks of planning. Inside was a vintage ring I'd found in an antique shop. A simple diamond in a setting from the 1950s, the same era as the Starlight. Allison looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" she whispered. "Depends on the answer," I replied with a shaky laugh. "Yes," she said immediately. "Of course it's yes." Lucky barked his approval as I slipped the ring onto her finger. "He says it's about time." I translated. The wedding was small but perfect, held in the parking lot of the Starlight at sunset, with classic cars forming a semicircle around us. Lucky served as ring bearer, naturally, wearing a bow tie that matched mine. My mother and Mike came, somewhat stiffly but making an effort, which was more than I'd expected. Afterward, we transformed the diner into a reception venue, with the jukebox providing the soundtrack and milkshakes served alongside champagne. As twilight deepened into night, the neon signs cast their colorful glow over a gathering that felt more like family than many of the blood relatives present. Life settled into a new pattern after that. The Starlight became a landmark on the tourist maps, highlighted in guidebooks as a must-visit attraction. The classic car shop developed a waiting list of clients from across the country. We bought the house next door to expand our little compound, renovating it into a comfortable home where Lucky had his own special corner of the living room. A year later, a film crew arrived to document the Starlight story for a show about American roadside attractions. The producer was particularly interested in Lucky's role, filming him retracing his steps to the old oak tree where the treasure had been buried. In your own words, the interviewer asked me, "What's the most valuable thing you found through this whole experience?" I glanced over at Allison, who was showing a young girl how to make the perfect milkshake behind the counter. Lucky dozed nearby, gray now appearing around his muzzle, but still the heart and soul of the place. "The real treasures don't shine," I answered, remembering my grandfather's wisdom. "They bark when you need them most. They help you see the value in things others might throw away. And they remind you that sometimes the best directions in life come from the most unexpected guides." The documentary aired 6 months later, bringing another wave of visitors to the Starlight. But by then, we had news that overshadowed even that excitement. Allison was pregnant with twins. Our family was growing. The business was thriving, and the future looked brighter than the Starlight's neon on a summer night. Some evenings, after closing, Allison and I sit on our front porch with Lucky at our feet, watching the sunset while the sounds of the jukebox drift faintly from the diner. In those quiet moments, I often think about the strange chain of events that brought us here. A chance encounter with a dog, a leap of faith on an old pickup truck, a buried treasure, and forgotten diner, waiting for someone to remember its worth. My grandfather used to say that life is like an old car. Sometimes you have to drive with the headlights off to find your way. I never understood what he meant until now. Sometimes the best journeys happen when you can't see the road ahead clearly. When you have to trust your instincts, follow unexpected guides, and believe that around the next bend might be exactly where you're meant to be. As the twins grow within Allison's belly, as Lucky naps contentedly at our feet, and as the starlight continues to shine its welcome to travelers, I know that this is where my headlights-off journey was always leading. Not to buried gold, but to the kind of riches that never tarnish, never depreciate, and never need to be locked away. The starlight's neon reflects in the windows of our home, a constant reminder that sometimes the best things in life don't come from where or when you expect them. They come from embracing the detours, trusting the navigators who enter your life at just the right moment, and being willing to dig beneath the surface to find what truly matters.